Good evening, everyone, and you're very welcome here to our virtual St Brigid's Day celebration. We're very much looking forward to an hour of rich discussion, and to kick off the proceedings, I'm delighted to introduce Ambassador Austin Butler.
Thank you, Doreen. To Fáilte Raibh go léir. Welcome everybody to this St Brigid's Day event, live from Stockholm. We're celebrating women's creativity and achievements. Välkomna alla till vårt möte online. That's my attempted Swedish. So, as many of you will know, St Brigid is one of the patron saints of Ireland. She lived in the 5th century and was a courageous person as well as a visionary, in that she founded an important monastery in County Kildare. The festival also has pagan roots and was known in previous times as Imbolc. It signals spring and a time of hope and renewal. Irish embassies around the world have marked St Brigid's Day, and I'm delighted that the embassy in Stockholm is doing so for a 3rd year in a row. Last year we celebrated women in business, and this year we're celebrating women in STEM, so science, technology, engineering and maths, and we're joined by 5 fine speakers from Sweden and Ireland. Our speakers are drawn from research institutes, academia, from Science Foundation Ireland also. We'll no doubt learn about opportunities and remaining challenges for women in STEM in terms of their studies and careers, and hopefully this session will nudge more young women listening today towards this path. Like Sweden, Ireland is a high-tech economy. We very much need diversity and the best talents working in these areas. And as part of Ireland's Nordic Strategy, we want to promote deeper collaboration and exchange between the 2 countries in research. Our panelists are the practitioners. You know how this is done, how networks are created, and we look forward to hearing from you about this aspect as well. We might also learn a thing or two about Swedish lagom and workplaces and how they differ from Ireland, and perhaps we can import for example, the Swedish fika coffee morning tradition to Ireland. I think we've lost that a little bit at home. A further word on St Brigid. An old tradition in rural Ireland was that pieces of cloth known as ribbeen bríd were blessed by Brigid as she passed through the land. These cloths gave the wearer protection. She was certainly something of an evangelist, as are our speakers today. In a way, they're passing on their own personal pieces of cloth for their chosen professions, and they're certainly flying the flag for their country. The session this evening is facilitated by Hannah Fraser, who's Director of the Nordic region for Enterprise Ireland, and herself breaking down barriers, if I may say so, Hannah. So I'd like to extend a warm thanks to particularly to Hannah. 1,000 thanks to also Muila Buikas, to our panelists, and also to Doreen Burke and Hannah Harto from the embassy team for making this event possible. Most importantly, thanks to you, our audience, for joining today for what I think will be a very interesting conversation. Over to you, Hannah.
Many thanks, Ambassador, and good evening, everyone. I was delighted to be asked to moderate this event, and thanks for your kind remarks, Austin, to mark St Brigid's Day. And I believe over the next hour, we will have a fascinating discussion on the theme of women blazing a trail in STEM. We will hear from each of the panelists about the kind of research they're engaged in, their experience as women working in STEM, and any challenges they have faced or opportunities they have seized during their careers so far. I know I certainly have learned a lot just reading about these amazing women's backgrounds and the areas of research they're involved in. And I hope this evening we can all learn from them about how Ireland can grow its collaboration with Sweden in this very important area. So before we dive into the discussion, I just wanted to highlight to the audience the Slido, which you'll see on screen. We really are encouraging participation from everyone in the audience, so please share any questions, ideas or feedback that you might have as we go along through the session, and we will come to the questions a little later on. So now, without any further delay, and to hear from the people that really matter this evening, I'm delighted to introduce the 5 women that will contribute to this evening's event. And bear with me as some of the pronunciation of the areas they're involved in research are a little bit challenging. So firstly, Dr. Rochelle Fritsch is the Research Policy Scientific Programme Manager at Science Foundation Ireland. And Rochelle will join us to set the scene from a Irish policy perspective on gender equality in STEM. And then to our 4 panellists, Dr. Lorna Lopez is joining us from Ireland and holds the position of Associate Professor at Maynooth University. Hazel Riley, who's not only a great player for the Stockholm Gales, but also a PhD candidate in immunology and gene therapy at the Karolinska Institute. Third up is Dr. Lily Killeen, who works as a postdoctoral researcher and neuroimmunologist at the Karolinska Institute also. And finally, Dr. Lucy Mathot, who works as a clinical molecular geneticist at Uppsala University. So with those introductions made, I'm delighted to kick off the session and to hand it over firstly to Dr. Rochelle Fritsch from Science Foundation Ireland to get us underway. Welcome, Rochelle.
Thank you very much, Hannah, and thank you very much for the invitation to join the event today. I'm delighted to be here chatting with these excellent scientists. So to set the scene a little bit, I wanted to talk a little bit about the policy history around gender equality in higher education and STEM in Ireland. So back in 2015, there was a major review of gender equality policies in higher education in Ireland, and from this, a report was formed, which formed a national action plan for gender equality, and that was chaired by Maura Geoghegan-Quinn, who was the chairperson in the European Commission. So from this report, there was a number of actions outlined, and there'd been some good work in gender equality before this, but this is the first time there was an action plan for all of the players in higher education and in STEM. And so in that, there were targets set or actions set for each of the organizations. And I think one of them I could talk about today, which I think was really impactful, was the requirement for all institutions to get an Athena Swan certification to ensure that they had a gender equality plan in place and they were doing actions themselves within the institutions to make sure there was gender equality in higher education and STEM. And within that plan as well, the funders like SFI had actions as well. And one of the things that we did was to develop our own gender equality strategy. And we focused on thinking of the ways that we could support the researchers that we were funding, encourage more women to apply for our grants, as that's where we found we had a limitation. There weren't enough women applying. And as well, look at ways to support gender equality within the ecosystem in Ireland. And so from this, we've been working for a number of years with all of our national partners. And there we've increased the number of women in the portfolio in SFI from 21% to 29% in 2020. And we feel we still have a lot of work to do, but I'm delighted to work with all of my national partners like the Higher Education Authority, as well as the other funders and the institutions themselves to make sure there's lots of opportunities for women in STEM in Ireland. So that's my very short synopsis, giving a policy scene setting, and I'd like to hand back over to you, Hannah.
Many thanks, Rochelle, and also to Science Foundation Ireland. I think that's really interesting just to kind of set the context for the discussion for the rest of the evening. So we really appreciate you joining us. So now I'm going to bring in our first panelist, Lorna Lopez, to give us a short introduction to your research areas and your experience working in STEM. Welcome, Lorna.
Thanks very much, Hannah, and thanks very much for everyone for having me here today. I'm really delighted. I'm an associate professor in Maynooth University, and Maynooth is in Kildare, so it's very nice to be here in St Brigid's Day, St Brigid of Kildare. So thank you very much. And I'm delighted to talk about my research experience, I suppose, in STEM. And I was thinking about it that actually it's 20 years ago to this year that I graduated from genetics in Trinity College in Dublin with a degree in genetics. And in the past 20 years, I've been really lucky to work in genetics research. And so I really enjoyed that. And 10 years of that was in Scotland, in the University of Edinburgh, where I studied for my PhD. And there I was really lucky to investigate a large family. And we used different genetic techniques to look for genetic evidence for, or genetic risk for neuropsychiatric conditions. So I really enjoyed that and was really lucky. And then I moved on to do some more postdoctoral research, using amazing birth cohorts to look at genetic effects there. So it was really that was a really exciting time for me too in Edinburgh. And then I moved back to Dublin, where I continued my research in genetics, and that was using other research birth cohorts where we combined genetics with other type of biological information, where we could look at risk for neuropsychiatric conditions. So that was 10 years ago now. And I suppose I was really lucky in that time to move from when I was in Dublin to move to Trinity College in Dublin, back to Trinity, I suppose, thanks to SFI, for work where I started to become a starting investigator, so I could become more independent. And then I moved to Maynooth University, where I am now. I have my own research group. I'm very lucky to have worked with amazing people through the way and work with amazing people now in Maynooth. And we're interested in the genetic differences and why what these genetic differences mean for neurodevelopmental conditions and what that can tell us about kind of underlying biology, for example, in circadian rhythms. So I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you very much. And hopefully I'll be here for another 20 years studying genetics. So thank you very much.
I'm sure there's lots of people that hope that too. Thanks, Lorna. We'll certainly dive in a little bit more with the questions later into your experience, but thanks for that great introduction. So moving on, I'll next invite Hazel Riley to share your experience working in STEM here in Sweden.
Thanks, Hannah, and thanks to the Irish Embassy for organising this event. It's an honour to be a part of it. I think it's a great initiative. So just like a little intro to how I got into research. I did a bachelor's degree in biomedical science, and at the time a PhD had never really crossed my mind because I had never been exposed to that environment. But when I came to Sweden for my Erasmus project, I really enjoyed being in a research lab. So my plans changed. I decided I wanted to do a PhD, but I definitely didn't have enough research experience to begin one. So I got a job as a biomedical analyst in a research lab here in Sweden, where I'm employed on a clinical trial project. So we're focused on a disease that affects your eyes. And there's cells in the back of your eye that with age, they deteriorate and you can lose your sight. But we've established a protocol that we can create these cells in the lab. And we hope now this year to inject the first batch into a patient. And hopefully, if everything goes well, we'll restore their sight. And then with that experience in that lab, I was able to apply for a PhD, which I started in November. So during my PhD project, I'll be trying to develop a new cancer treatment using stem cells. And there are already a few cell-based therapies for cancers, but not all of them work that great. There are issues. For example, some patients have to donate their own white blood cells. They get genetically modified in the lab and then given back to the patient. But they can already be sick enough that they won't be able to give enough cells. So our approach is to use stem cells because they can be grown almost infinitely. So we're guaranteed to have enough cells for a treatment. And so hopefully that goes well. There'll be a new cancer treatment. My experience in STEM has been amazing. I love it here in Sweden. And hopefully I'll continue my career and end up with as much experience as Lorna has. So back over to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Thanks, Hazel. God, it really is amazing to hear about like some of the life-changing therapies you guys are working on. So thanks for that, Hazel. And like I said, we will come back with some more questions for sure in a short while. Great. Next up, I'll invite Lily Colleen. So Lily Mathot, apologies, to share your experience.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share some slides. 1 second. Okay. Okay, so you can hear me?
We can, yeah, and we can see your screen.
Perfect. So thanks very much for the invite. So yeah, I'm a postdoctoral researcher also at the Karolinska. And basically, I just wanted to tell you also a little bit about my sort of journey to Sweden. So I did my BSc in genetics at University College Cork. And although I really enjoyed genetics, I was really fascinated by more immunology. So I went on to do a master's in translational cancer medicine at King's College. And actually this was really focused more on immunotherapies in ovarian cancer. And then I decided to stay in London and I did a PhD there. And then I did a postdoc, my first postdoc in Germany in the Center for Neurodegeneration in Bonn. And during my PhD and my postdoc, I really was focused on an immune cell of the brain that's called microglia. And these really have been the cells that I've worked with now for nearly 11 years. And I wanted to just show a picture of them because I think a picture really says it about these cells. So they are really highly branched. And this really is to show you that they are really surveying the brain. They're the cells that are important for maintaining the right balance in your brain, basically. And then this is actually a picture, it's actually a drawing from a really famous neuroscientist, Pio della Rio Ortega, back in 1919. And when they get activated, you see here, they become really spring into action. And this is just a change in the way they look, basically. And they're really important for injury and infection. And actually at this stage, they've been implicated in nearly every pathology that affects the brain. And during my PhD and my postdoc, I was really focused on how these cells change with age, how they can trigger neuroinflammation, and in that way be extremely dangerous for things like Alzheimer's. And we were trying to understand how we could basically regulate these cells in a different way to treat these diseases. So what brought me to Sweden from Germany? So I really wanted to return to cancer research. So I wanted to work on microglia, but in brain tumors, because obviously they're in the brain. And I met an amazing scientist who is a professor here at Karolinska. I met him at a summer school, and I really wanted to work with him because he was really a leading mind in this research. So it happened to be that he was in Sweden, and I came and I joined his lab 2 years ago. And now we're working on how to target these cells, but to treat brain tumors. So I just have a picture here of the brain tumor, and basically you have intermingled with the tumor cells, microglia. And what has been shown is that they're really pro-tumoral, so they can really increase the growth of these really horrible brain tumors. So I'm trying to find ways of, again, trying to target these cells so that they start to kill brain tumors, and as a treatment, particularly in pediatric brain tumors. So that's sort of my research background and my experience in STEM in Sweden. So I think some of the obstacles that I think I found was, like, the first thing is that when you come as a postdoc in Sweden, you in many cases start on a stipend. So for example, for me, I took a pay cut coming from Germany, which is something you need to consider. I also think that there is issues around stability, particularly as a postdoc, because there's different sets of funding. There's a lot of rules, particularly at the Karolinska, how long you can be on a stipend and how long you can, for example, be employed as a postdoc. And it can be quite expensive to be a researcher here. So one of my experiences with when you're trying to start your own research group is you pay a lot of money on rent, for example, at Karolinska. And as far as I'm aware, I haven't experienced this in any other country. But of course, there's also been like amazing opportunities. So I was started to apply early on for fellowships, and I was really lucky to be awarded my own postdoctoral fellowship from Barncancerfonden, which is a Swedish charity on children tumours. And I also was able to be awarded by some other smaller grants. And I also got awarded to have special postdoctoral subsidised housing through an amazing society here called the Wenner-Gren. So there's been a lot, but also some other things to consider. So with that, thanks very much for your attention. And yeah, I will stop sharing now. So 1 second.
Many thanks, Lily. Some really good themes that you've raised there already, which I'm sure will come up throughout the rest of the discussion. So thanks for that. So lastly, but certainly not least, can I invite Lucy Mathot to join us and share a little bit of an introduction about yourself?
Thanks, Anna, and thanks a lot to the Embassy for organising this great event. As you mentioned, Hannah, I'm working at Uppsala University Hospital as a clinical molecular geneticist, and there my work is mainly involved in the interpretation of genetic analysis for diagnosis and management of hematological malignancies, so child and adult leukemias and lymphomas. The position is affiliated with the university, so it's also a research position. So I have maintained my connection to the university, and I'm involved in related research. So mainly using molecular analysis such as DNA sequencing to characterize these malignancies and try to find new risk stratifiers or therapeutic targets for leukemias. My previous position was as a postdoc at Uppsala University. I'm working mainly with solid tumors, so primarily with colorectal cancer, which is what I did my PhD work on. And we had a great opportunity at Uppsala University we had access to many very well characterized tumor samples from Uppsala Biobank, which is a massive repository of human samples stored from patients that are diagnosed and treated at the hospital. So this was really facilitated, these studies where we had large groups of very well characterized patients to find new molecular markers to predict metastatic disease development in colorectal cancer. And during my time as a PhD, I also worked a lot with method development. And in this way, I was part of developing a technology for automated DNA and RNA extraction from tumors, which was a technology we then patented and started a company with. So I worked there for a time after I graduated from my PhD. And we actually managed to sell the product to clinical labs in the Nordic countries. And I found that working with a small company from the university, there was a huge amount of support for like incubating research ideas that could be commercialized at the university. There were a lot of different courses you could take, and a lot of support, particularly for women, a lot of grants available and so on. It's also an advantage that researchers and inventors at Swedish universities actually own their own inventions. So it's possible to commercialize these ideas outside of research without having to acquire them from the institutions. So I would say it has been extremely positive experience for me to work in STEM. And I've been very lucky to have the opportunity to work both in research and in industry, and now I've moved into the clinical side of things. So that's all from me. Back to you, Hannah.
That's great, Lucy, and thanks for that. Really interesting to start to kind of learn about some of the supports and the ecosystem that's there around people and women working in STEM. So thanks for that. So wow, what fascinating experience right across the panel. It really is incredible just to get a small glimpse into the areas that each of you are so passionate about and spend your days working hard on, and the links indeed between Ireland and Sweden, and some of the reasons why many of you chose to come to Sweden. So with the introductions done, at this stage we're going to move into the Q&A part of the discussion. So just again to remind the audience to submit your questions via the Slido, and we'll pick them up as we go. But I might get things underway and kick off with a few questions to each of the panelists. And with that, Lorna, I might bring you in again. And like I said earlier, feel free if any of the other panelists have experience or context to add, do jump in. But Lorna, to start, I'm curious, you know, you mentioned where you started in STEM, but were you always interested in STEM? Were you drawn to science subjects at school, or where did that kind of interest initially stem from?
I always really enjoyed maths in school, and maths and accounting and physics and chemistry. And then I studied biology in university. So I always really enjoyed those type of subjects. And I suppose in terms of always been interested in genetics, I was thinking about this the other day. It's one of my earliest memories of when my sister and I were very similar. We look exactly the same. We talk the same. You know, my mum calls us both the same names. I've got two sisters, but one in particular, a year younger than me. We're very close. I know when we were younger, I was getting ready for Irish dancing feshes. My mom could not curl my hair in the slightest, but my sister had these beautiful curls. It was always great. I was like, oh, how come we're practically the same? But of course, she won the genetic lottery for curls, and you know, Irish dancing as well. And you know, obviously now, but that for me, that you know, the importance in the genetic differences. You've got the same parents, but within the family, where are those differences from? And so, you know, I've always researched that and find it really fascinating. So I suppose that's for me is really interesting, and I love maths. And so that's the part of the research that I do is computational. It's based on maths, and I really enjoy that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
That's brilliant. Yeah, I love that. I love that segue from Irish dancing and curls. I think there's very few kids that would, you know, think about that in that perspective. They would be jealous about their sister's hair.
Sister's curls.
Exactly. But that's brilliant. Hazel, from your perspective, I know you kind of alluded to the fact that you're still maybe at early stages of your career, but from a young age, have you also been interested? You know, did you face any barriers when you were looking to, you know, select STEM subjects at second level? Yeah, what's your views on that?
So when it comes to my interests, I think I always enjoyed science in school and maths, but when it came to actually continuing with science, I actually wasn't interested in that. I wanted to be a teacher, but I did work experience in transition year and realized that it wasn't for me. So then I continued down the road of science. And when it comes to, did I face barriers? I don't think I did. And I think that's to do with the school that I was in. I was in a mixed school, and there, like, a number of our like really good maths teachers, really good science teachers were all women. We had a woodwork teacher that was a woman. So I think when you're young and you see women in those positions, it just becomes the norm. It never seems like something, oh, women don't do that. So like I never experienced that when I was younger. So I think that was really important for me to not face a barrier.
Yeah, I think that brings up, you know, the whole idea of role models and having people, you know, and I think each of you tonight are being ambassadors for STEM and encouraging others to follow. So I think it's a really nice kind of point to highlight. Lily, we've just heard from obviously Lorna and Hazel, who were drawn and passionate about, you know, science and STEM subjects from a young age, but you know, there is a lack of balance, you know, in many aspects. And I'm just interested in your views as to, you know, why you think that is, that there is kind of a dominance of men in STEM as opposed to women, and, you know, maybe any ideas or thoughts that you have about, you know, how we can shift that or how we can address that. I think you just unmute there, Lily.
Sorry. I'll mute myself. Can you hear me? Yeah, I think I don't know if it's changed so much now, but I think particularly when I was in secondary school, I think we were maybe not, it wasn't very clear, I think, what you could do maybe with a science degree. So I don't know, like, knowing what I know now about just all the opportunities, even completely outside of research, academic research, you know, working for a company, biotech, you know, you can do public governmental policy, health policy. So I think this can put, I think, you know, from the more junior level, can put people off, that you think, oh, maybe you can become a teacher or something from it. So I think that could be one thing. I think from more what's tending to happen from the academic basis is that you have a lot of women up to a certain point, and then I think you don't have, you know, you lose a lot of women. I think the farther, I know, for example, for me, that nearly all my friends who did PhDs who are women have left academia. for various reasons. So I think there has to be maybe a shift in that as well, even though it's a bit difficult.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because I'm just reading some of the questions that have come in, and one of them is what can be done to encourage women to stay in research, that there are often, many female PhD or postdoc, but it seems that, more at a kind of professor level that it's more dominated by men. So, any, I suppose, thoughts on what can be done?
I think I think a lot of it is stability. I think it's hard when you get to a certain age and you don't have the stability. And I think that's definitely a big problem from the academic side, because and then you see all the people who have left who have, permanent jobs in industry. And, I think the stability and also, I think what attracts people is that, and also the pay is much better from that side as well. So I think there are two things if we can try and address would definitely help. Because I think when you're starting to think about paying a mortgage, for example, and you're only on a 2-year contract in academia, this is extremely difficult. And I think this is why a lot of people leave, actually.
Yeah, and I probably can't move off that topic without giving Lorna, as an associate professor, when you look around you, maybe what made you stay, or what made other, women that are peers to you stay?
Well, I've really enjoyed it. I know I said that yesterday actually to one of my students, that I think I'm the only one in my class that's still perhaps working in academia. But one of the things I suppose that really helped me was SFI. So where Rochelle is from, I started investigator grant from that, and they changed the rules of that. So I could apply for that investigator grant, but still work part-time. So I could care for my 3 small children at the time. So for me, that single thing enabled me to apply for the fellowship to become more independent, because otherwise I wouldn't have done that. So little things like that, I think, and SFI and other funding bodies are really trying to change that to make it more flexible. Now, I was still part-time postdoc, and I was still a short-term contract. So that, there were difficulties and challenges with that too. But I enjoyed the flexibility and the research, and I think that really helped me get to this position that I'm here now, associate professor in Maynooth. So I'm here about 2 years. So I know I'm only 40 and got my job when you're 40, which my parents think is ridiculous. Like that, as you said, Lily, that your friends and your peers have their nice jobs with their, nice holidays and things like that. And that's not always the case in academia, but I've really enjoyed it and enjoyed the opportunities that I've gotten. So.
Yeah, that's great. And I suppose it's not always easy, but if you love the work that you do, you stick in it. And it's great to hear that supports like those from SFI really do make a difference. So, Dr. Rochelle, I don't know if you have anything to add on that point.
Yeah, I wanted to say I'm delighted that you felt you were supported at a critical juncture in your career. That's exactly what we're trying to do in our gender strategy. So we've actually introduced a lot of things, and allowing part-time work is one. I'm delighted you felt supported in your time. We actually introduced full maternity leave for all of our PhD students, so they're able to take a full 6 months, just like people who are in employment, because that is a time that if it would be a critical juncture in your career where you might decide to leave. We also make sure that there's full support for maternity leave for our postdocs and everyone who's funded on our awards. And we find that the biggest drop in the numbers of women are at those critical junctures, a lot of the time from PhD to postdoc, and then from postdoc into the academic staff. So those are the times that we as policymakers need to jump in and figure out what are the supports required, or how can we change our system to make it easier for women at those points in time.
Many thanks, Rochelle. Really, really interesting. And I think that's a really nice theme to kind of, draw through. And, I might come to you now, Lucy, and you've spent a good amount of your career in Sweden, so far. And I'm involved in business here, obviously. And, that Swedish stereotype of egalitarianism and gender equality, I definitely see it, translate into the workplace and in organizations here. how's that been your experience when we talk about, the importance of paid maternity leave and other supports? What's your experience of seeing that through your work here so far?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's difficult for me to draw parallels, having spent most of my working life in Sweden, so it's hard for me to reflect on how it is in Ireland. But I mean, it's definitely true that the organisations are certainly more flat. I mean, there's less of a hierarchy. Everyone is, even in the higher up positions, they're sort of expected to chip in, even when you have, to empty the dishwasher and so on. I was kind of surprised at that, especially in in areas where it can be very hierarchical. Yeah, so
you're seeing some of it relate through your experience also. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah.
That's great. So I might just come to a question from the audience now, and this is really open to anyone that wants to come in on it. International experience seems like a really kind of key and big feature of many of your careers. Lorna, you mentioned Scotland, Lily in Germany and Sweden, etc. So I suppose how important is international experience in STEM research, and how can, I suppose, the uptake of international programs and opportunities for Irish students be encouraged?
Well, I'll start. Maybe, is that okay, Hannah?
Please do,
I really enjoyed working in Scotland, and I know sure it's only a short trip from Ireland, but actually going to the Edinburgh University was amazing. But the people that I met when I was there, so the PhD cohort, I'm still really good friends with a lot of the guys that I did my PhD with. Actually, some of them live in Linköping, in Sweden. And so just to meet people from all over the world, even just going across to Scotland, hence the Lopez name. I met a Colombian husband, so I think that's really important. And how to encourage more uptake of international collaboration. I think days like today and this event are really important, because I think that just students and people aren't aware of the opportunities that are available. So I, sent this message out to lots of the researchers and students, and hoping that they can see, oh God, I never thought about moving to Sweden, and so the possibility there. So I think days like today are really nice. Thank you.
That's great, thanks.
I also have a point on that. I think, it's invaluable moving countries and getting experience, but money can also be an issue, funding those things. So I think if there were more opportunities for students to get grants so that they could actually go and take a master's in Sweden rather than do a master's at home and just come for Erasmus. But if they could get a grant and come and do their whole master's in Sweden, that would be so invaluable. But it can be so difficult to fund that, to make those trips. It is a big move. It's still Europe. You don't have to get a visa or anything, but there's still a lot of costs involved. So
yeah, absolutely. I think supports to make that transition easier would certainly, I'm sure, encourage more to make the leap. Anyone else want to come in on that?
I think that's a really good idea. I know they're in place, say, for example, if you want to go and do summer research internships, say, between Ireland and France. So something between Ireland and Sweden would be really, really useful. And it's all about having the grant and the opportunity to go. I think that's great.
Absolutely. Lily, there's one in here from you, and I'm sure we're all quite interested in this. How far do you think we are away from really, understanding the brain?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I mean, the thing is, the brain is so complex. So I think, we've made a huge, if I just talk about microglia, for example, microglia neuroinflammation has just exploded in the last 20 years of research, and we know so much more now than we did about these cells, but there's still huge black holes about different time points during development, for example. So I think we've a long way to go, but we've made quite a bit of progress, would be what I would say.
Absolutely. So we've made some of that journey, but yeah,
way to go.
we've a long way to go. Very good. I suppose I'm interested, if you have any other, advice for young girls who are maybe tuning in or thinking about pursuing a career in STEM. How would you encourage them, or what advice would you give them?
So can you still hear me? Yeah. So
yeah.
I think the best thing if you're interested in research is definitely, or science in general, is to do, some like a work experience or some short internship. Like we often have people coming here in Sweden, from secondary school, for example. So I think if you're anyway interested, just, contact, I would never, anytime I've ever had any sort of student contact me, I will either take them in our lab or find somewhere else for them to go. So I think just contact people and don't be afraid. I think when I was a student, particularly when I was, a much younger student, I would be so nervous about contacting some of these people. But actually, I think, most people are quite happy in research to share that experience and encourage, young people to get involved. My favorite part now is actually interacting with students. So just, get in contact with people and, maybe go to a lab and get that experience. Because then I think you will, if you have a passion for it, you will find out pretty quickly.
I think that's great. And Hazel, I suppose, what about you? Did you get any words of wisdom in your own career? Did anyone, help encourage you, or would you have any advice to pass on?
I think, like for me, it was transition year in secondary school was the game changer, of how I ended up going into science. And it was so good for me that I got to try out those subjects with no commitment. So doing something like science in transition year, and then you find out there with the basics if you're interested in it or not. And then, like, as you go through your career, you meet different people. If you interact with your lecturers in college, they're always so happy to give advice and help you out. Like, I'm still in contact with some of my lecturers, especially when I was applying for the PhD. And like, the more people you interact with, the more you network, you'll always get more and more advice. Like, you never stop learning.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to be as well, in a role that you never stop learning in. And Lorna, as you, I suppose, meet, I'm sure, many students or aspiring students, what is it that you say, or how you encourage them?
Just exactly what everyone else was saying there, to just, if you're really interested, just send an email, get in touch. Everyone's really happy to help out in general. And just like Lily was saying, if someone sends an email, Jenny, try to get back as soon as possible and see any kind of opportunities. We host plenty of students here in our group and at all levels, from visiting researchers to undergrads, and school students when we can do that. This, and Maynooth University here in the Department of Biology is wonderful for outreach. During Science Week, we have hundreds and hundreds of students come and see all the exciting things that we do. So even I think just making it open so that come in and see the labs and meet the lecturers, and we're all normal, it's not scary, and you might be really interested in it. So I think approachability is really nice, so to be able to go, send an email and get in touch. And there are opportunities there, but I think a lot of them can be really hidden, that you don't know where the grants are or how to find out, or like, you might need, a bit of money to do a summer internship or something. And like lecturers, we know that type of thing. We know where to find the money, how to write grants, and can help you with that. Like, don't be put off by things like that. There's definitely help there. So.
Yeah, there's someone there that can guide you through it if you haven't done it before.
Yeah. And it's really rewarding. Well, I find it really rewarding, meeting, and as Lily said, meeting all the students and working and going to conferences and with, and it's really rewarding for me. But and I've heard the same back as well, that people really enjoy working, even the experience with it. And even if they figure out afterwards, like, oh, look, it's not for me, don't really fancy this type of work, would you get away with your statistics or something that's not for me? But at least they know what the research environment is like. They might prefer to work in an actual lab. So I think that's really important too, as well. That all is not lost if you don't like it in the end.
Totally. I think that's great advice. I think I'm interested to explore a little bit more about, the differences between, Ireland and Sweden. And Lucy, I see a questions come in there about, the point you raised around the intersection between, business and science. And I suppose it's asking the question, is there perhaps like a lack? And you talked about the commercialization opportunities here. What is that like in Ireland? Is there a lack? Do we need to do more? And I suppose anyone have any experience of that?
I mean, I can just speak from experience here that I think it's fairly unique in Sweden that you as a researcher own your invention and are therefore free to commercialize it. So I've understood that that's kind of a unique aspect to Swedish universities. So perhaps that's something that is lacking in Ireland. And also the support, and in particular the support for women. I mean, there are a lot of investment organizations that really provide grants that are very much supportive of women being on the board of various companies. There are a lot of sort of incubator companies that are affiliated with universities that are really really good at supporting in the early stages with financing and providing business coaches and also just connecting that business world to research, which is often like something, if you go down a science route, you're often kind of go away from the business route, or at least that was the case for me. You either chose one way or another, and I felt that if I hadn't had that support that I did with the courses that they provided, I wouldn't have had the confidence to go ahead. So perhaps that's something to think about in Ireland, that to provide those extra opportunities for education outside of your research position.
That's great. Thanks, Lucy. I suppose any other panelists, have noticed, things that either side could learn from each other through your experiences. No one wants to come in on that? Well, good. I think the next question, Lucy, is also kind of for you. It says, you've touched on the fact that your research, your work combines both research and practices and practice. What are, I suppose, some of the advantages or challenges of that?
Advantages, of course, are that you have first-hand access to the most interesting patients because you're the one analyzing them. So you think, this is something unusual, I can follow up on this, we can do a case report on this family with this unusual mutation or whatever. It's like you are the one seeing the results for the first time, and maybe starting to maybe get the, it starts to get the ideas coming, that's what you could possibly do with that. But at the same time, I mean, the patients always come first, and there is no lack of samples coming in all the time. So the struggle to get the time to do the research is enormous, and we kind of have to fight for that all the time to get in our research days, because all of the analysis, I think, all over different analytical labs, they're just increasing all the time, and there's more things you can do, and there's more in-depth, new techniques for everything. So it's the time constraint, I think, is the major challenge there.
Yeah, really interesting. Well, look, I think we've time for one more, and this is, I suppose, maybe an ask that's come in. Do any of the panelists ever speak at schools? This person works at an English school in Stockholm, and thinks, it would really impact the students enormously. So yeah, any experience across the panelists in terms of speaking at schools?
Yeah,
I
so
really, oh, sorry.
no, Lorna, go. No, I can go.
No, sorry, Lily. No, yeah, I'll be really brief. I was
No.
just, when I was in Edinburgh and in Dublin and Maynooth as well. So spoke, you know, anything from my kids' preschool, so tiddlywinks, where you go in and give little brain jellies and tell them, you know, dress up in your lab coats with your microscopes, and they really enjoy that. And then also to secondary schools, we've done go in and have a chat and tell them about researching. They're, you know, the questions are unbelievable, and even the whole process of, you know, people ask me, "Oh, you're a scientist? Like, you don't look like a scientist. What does that actually mean when you're a researcher, a scientist every day?" So I've really enjoyed it, and sure, look, I bribe the students with sweets and teddy bears, and we have loads of really interactive things. My PhD student Fiona has this really cool balloon DNA double helix. So Ireland is really wonderful at supporting lots of outreach and engagement activities like that. And even we have my mom one day, I got her to make bean bags that are like how heavy an adult brain is and a baby brain. So little things like that I think are really useful. Anyway, so that's my experience.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I think it's back to that role model if they could see it, but also making it accessible through, you know, simple things like the beanbags. I'm sure it draws in the attention and gets them interested. Lily, you were going to come in as well about your experience.
Well, yeah, no, I did a bit of that in London actually with Cancer Research UK. So, but we used to do with kind of more primary school kind of activities. So one of the things we used to do is get them to extract DNA from strawberries, which is a very simple thing. It sounds very complex, but it's actually really easy to do with kids. And I think just getting them involved at that level as an activity, there was like a lot of engagement. And I think when they're sort of that young and they can kind of start to see, you know, the excitement of doing an experiment, I think that can be really kind of powerful. And then, of course, they can ask you questions and you get every random question from kids. But yeah, I think those things are really, really, really positive and actually are very enjoyable for, I think, us as well as scientists to sort of be able to bring that excitement, I think, to the younger generation is really nice. So, yeah.
That's great. I think a lovely note to end on, and we're just coming up about time. Yeah, what a fascinating discussion. I think an absolutely inspiring bunch of women. A lovely way to, I think, mark St Brigid's Day. I think it's really clear anyway to me that, you know, the appetite to continue these conversations is obvious. It's been a pleasure to meet you all and to moderate this discussion between such a remarkable group. And I just want to close by thanking the Embassy for giving me the opportunity to join the discussion, and also to each of the women and speakers that joined us today for your contributions. There's loads of questions. There's lots more that I didn't get round to, and we really do kind of welcome, you know, all your input and ideas. So with that said, I will hand this back across to Ambassador Gormley to make some closing remarks. So thank you all.
Thank you very much, Hannah. And as you say, really inspiring. Also, I'd say humbling, to be honest, just given the really life-changing, cutting-edge research that you're all doing as panelists. This came from a GAA. Well, GAA, in a sense, as Hannah said, that these are women who are skilled on the pitch, but also then we realized that they had other skills they were bringing to the table. But yeah, listen, thanks a million for that. We had some intent here because SFI and Maynooth University were listening carefully, I know, because we also wanted to remind you of Ireland and, you know, some of the opportunities that there are back in Ireland for women in research. So that's one element. And as Hannah says, if there are other ideas for networking in this area in Sweden, please do contact the embassy at Stockholm, embassy@dfa.ie. And certainly, as you may have noticed, I've been taking notes judiciously in terms of ways in which we can remove barriers and get more exchange and researchers coming into Sweden, but also Swedish researchers into Ireland. And I think the Swedish ambassador to Ireland may have also participated. So we will certainly be discussing that and following up. So thanks again to everybody. Fantastic exchange. And yeah, happy St. Brigid's Day, the day after. All the best. And thanks to Gareth as well in the background for facilitating.